Well, good afternoon, everyone. Happy Monday, May 17th, 2021. Another meeting of the Arlington branch NAACP. Going to have a unique meeting tonight in the sense that we're going to have a little bit of business up front, take care of that, and then we're going to go right into our structured dialogue with candidates. Many of you know me, I'm Julius D. Spain Sr. Many people call me JD, President of the Arlington branch NAACP and Regional Vice President for the Virginia State Conference of the NAACP. We have quite a few people joining right now, and our secretary is working hard behind the scenes to bring everyone in. I'm going to start with my opening and just tell you that the past month has been quite busy for the NAACP here in Arlington, but make no mistake about it, we're out there working on behalf of not only our members, but those citizens who need the NAACP, regardless of race, color, creed, or religion. So it's been a pleasure. We're about to turn into the summer months. We know we start these meetings at 7 o'clock, and looks like we're shifting out of COVID. 7 o'clock, the sun is still up, and you still have people doing their thing. But it's great. It is great that we're moving, I think, on the other side of this COVID pandemic, but there's still much more work to do. Still much more work to do. So with that being said, we are having a unique meeting tonight. I am going to call for suspension of rules, which means we are not going to go by our regular schedule. We're going to do something a bit different tonight. So if I have any members, any elected officials on the call, I'm going to call for suspension of the rules. Just unmute yourself. Do I have any
motion to suspend the rule?
All right. Can I get a second from elected member?
Second.
Who was that? Okay, Adriana. Yeah, great. All right, it's been properly moved in second that we suspend with the rules for this meeting. All in favor, just verbally say aye. If you're a member, say aye.
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 All opposed have the same right. The ayes have it, motion carried. Madam Secretary, I know we may not have all the executive committee tonight because it is a brief program for business, but if you may, please start with a roll call of officers, if you may.
Certainly. Start with First Vice President Kent Carter.
Not sure if he's on yet.
Kent Carter. Second Vice President Sharice Kearns. Sharice Kearns. Third Vice President Michael Heminger.
Present.
Treasurer Roy Austin. Treasurer Roy Austin. Assistant Treasurer Adriana Spain.
Present.
I'm the Secretary, Wanda Younger, I'm present. Assistant Secretary Dominique Jenkins. Dominique Jenkins. Executive Committee at Large, Karen Nightingale. Karen Nightingale. Executive Committee at Large, James Younger.
Present.
Executive Committee at Large, Simone Walker.
Present.
At Large Member, Carolyn Kane.
No, she doesn't. No, you don't account for her.
Jacob Williams, Community Coordination. Matt Rogers, Criminal Justice.
Thank you.
Megan Brew, Economic Development.
She's excused tonight.
Gabrielle Cantor, Environmental and Climate Justice.
Present.
Helen Macbeth, Housing.
I saw Kellen come on.
Present.
Tim Dempsey, Housing.
Present.
Maya Jones, Labor and Industry.
Present.
Legal redress, Henry Reddick. Henry Reddick. Political action, Jamie Abrams.
Present.
Political action, Megan Razor.
Present.
Religious affairs, Reverend Davis.
Present.
Religious affairs, Rosa Dunkley. Rosa Dunkley. Scholarship, Adora Williams. Adora Williams. Scholarship, Jill DeWitt.
Present.
Jill, thank you. Special events, Shayla Smith. Shayla Smith. Special events, Marvin Nels. Marvin Nels. And membership, Keisha Tinsley.
He's excused.
And I believe I saw First Vice President Kent Carter.
Yes, he did come
Present.
on. He's present. Okay.
And Second Vice President Sharice Kearns.
You're muted, Sheree.
Present.
She's
On
here.
mute.
She's here.
Concludes the roll call.
I'm
Thank you.
present.
She's present. Thank you, Madam Secretary, for the roll call. So you should have received, everyone who was registered, a copy of our committee reports for the month of through April. Some may have ran into May. Look at those at your leisure. What you'll find is the work of the committees, what they've been doing since our last meeting. Again, if you are interested in working, you are a member and you're interested in working on any of those committees, please reach out to either the chair or the secretary of the branch, and we will make sure you get some work. All right. Keep in mind that in NAACP, we don't get paid. This is all volunteer here, but they've done some good work. I think the financials are there. I think you'll also see our membership numbers. We did increase since our last time. We're at 838 now. So, you know, at the beginning of the year, we started out saying we want to hit 1,000. And I think we're going to reach 1,000 before December, even if I have to go do some door knocking, because in a county of 250,000 people, we should at least get 1,000. I think we'll get there. But we have increased, I think it was about 20 some odd folks in the past month, a couple of Silver Life memberships, had a pretty substantial donation from a local citizen, a local church. So we're doing some work and staying busy. At this time, so we can stay on schedule, this month, we're going to have our Labor and Industry Committee, the chair, come forward and give you a brief to our membership more especially, their strategic plan for this year. So, Madam Chair, are you here from the Labor and Industry Committee?
Yes, I am here.
All right, so the floor is yours, and I'm getting out of your way.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I hope you're having a really great Monday. My name is Maya. I am the chair of the Labor and Industry Committee. So we have determined our 2021 priorities. Our first priority, well, first, let me tell you a little bit about the committee in general. So we are a new committee, and so we are primarily just getting started. We're really excited to be able to dive into the work of making sure that there are equitable practices and we expand the rights of people of color, laborers and workers. And so that is our main purpose and goals. But our 2021 goals, the first is to help support and get private unions, so helping with the PRO Act and repealing right to work, as well as supporting the public labor unions that we do have and making sure that they actually have true bargaining rights in Arlington. Arlington, because of the way that Virginia's laws work, municipalities can do it. They control the unions and what unions are allowed to bargain on. And so our unions, to some degree, are in name only. So we're helping with that. So that would be our first goal. Our second goal is going to be, or is, making sure that we are holding businesses accountable to equitable business practices. So making sure that, you know, people aren't being discriminated against in the workforce, and making sure, trying to figure out how we can push businesses to be able to do that. So that would be our second goal. And then our third goal is to expand our name and membership for the committee, which we hope to do in this year, since we are a new committee. That is a really important goal of ours, because we want to make sure that we are able to build capacity and be able to continue to improve and be able to measure our goals as we continue on this front. And in order to do so, we need members. So if you think you have extra time, we definitely can use your help, but also you don't have to know everything there is to know about labor. We will help you get there. We will help support you. We are a very inclusive committee. And so if you have the time and bandwidth, we would love to have you. We meet every second Monday at 6:30 p.m. For about a half an hour to 45 minutes. And then if we need to touch base again later in the month, we meet for about 15 to 20 minutes on the fourth Monday at that same time. So this also is included inside of some of the communications that they send out, and the link is standing. So whatever the link is, it will always be that same. That if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, and I will make sure that I put the committee's like my committee email address into the chat if anyone has any questions or would like to join. And with that, Mr. President, I yield back my time.
You're on mute.
Thank you, Madam Chair of the Labor and Industry Committee. The NAACP, all branches per Constitution, bylaws, should have about 21 standing committees. We at Arlington Branch NAACP, and not many across the Commonwealth, have 21 standing committees fully staffed. I'll give you an example. If you go up to a place like Detroit, I often talk a lot about Detroit because they're doing an outstanding job and have been for years. They have a branch, the Detroit branch actually has 10,000 members in it. And they're like an organization within the city, and they're very influential, but they're a model to emulate. But hopefully in due time, we will get there. But with your help, come on and be a part of our committees, our branch, if you're not already a member. And we will we'll work with you. And like something Maya said, we're a very inclusive and diverse organization. Okay, and we sincerely we mean that, and we represent everyone. What was going to be on any questions from the members or anyone to or for labor and industry while we have a few moments? If you do have a question, feel free to unmute yourself and just ask it. If not, I'll move on or raise your hand. Madam Secretary, if you're monitoring that, please. All right, looks like we don't have any questions. At this time, we were going to have our economic development team come on board and provide their strategic plan or priorities for this year. But being that something came up at the last minute and she is out, what I'm going to do is in the chat, I'm just going to paste for right now. I don't know if I got all of it. There, you can look at your leisure, the goals for the Economic Development Committee. We can say that's pretty much a newly formed committee as well. I kind of started out doing some things with the chamber and other places, but we come to find out we had a lot of folks that are interested in economic development. So Megan Brew has a outstanding committee right now, and they're heavily engaged in the community. But go ahead and look at their priorities and what they're working on this year, and also their report, which was sent to you, at least all of those who registered. I'm going to take some time because we made an adjustment to the schedule, and I know our political action team is coming on at 7:25 in about 10 minutes. So if you've been watching, or if you received some emails, there's some late breaking news. We had an executive committee meeting on Sunday that went pretty long at the branch. And it went rather long because there was an issue that came up that the NAACP had to address. And if you read our correspondence that was sent out today, there was some ordinance. There was some ordinance that Arlington County will be considering tomorrow at the recess meeting as it relates to Civilian Review Board. Not to get into all the nuances surrounding that, you can go online and look and read that ordinance for yourself. But I will just share this with you. We're coming out at the NAACP and opposing or asking for a delay in that action right now, because that ordinance came out on Thursday. And it's about to go out for advertisement on a Tuesday at a recess meeting. And nobody, no stakeholders, no one in this community has been able to sit down and talk through the many issues regarding this ordinance, which in itself is quite significant. If anyone knows what's been going on the past year or so as it relates to civilian review boards and the NAACP's position at the national, state, and local level as it relates to subpoena power. The ordinance on its face does not pass the test. Does not pass the test. So we have asked, we will be asking, and we're asking you as citizens to do your due diligence. Go out there and look at that ordinance. There's no teeth in it. We want independent oversight of the police department. We don't want another commission. We don't want another advisory board. If it requires us putting some funding in this to get the right people, then let's do it right the first time around. But anytime you try to shape policy in the dark, when it comes out in the light, the NAACP is going to be there. And that's where we're at. We've had 4 lawyers and our team do some analysis of this policy, of this ordinance, and it's not there, unfortunately. And I've been in conversation, and many people in the branch have been in conversations with leaders in Arlington. Our Virginia State Conference of the NAACP came out today and supports us in our endeavors, saying that we need to delay. We're asking the county to delay. That is significant. This is a significant moment for us, along with everything else that's going on, whether it's housing, education. There's a lot going on, but we're not going to pass this up. And we're hoping and expecting that our elected officials will do the right thing tomorrow night, because it is open to public comment. So if you want to do your research and talk about it, feel free to do so. With that being said, I do have a few minutes. I know our first vice president is here, and I want to give some time to our first, second, and third vice president on this particular issue before we turn it over to the Political Action Committee to get this structured dialogue started. We'll start with the first VP. Kent Carter, anything you want to say to the members and those on the call as it relates to what I just talked about, the Civilian Review Board and the ordinance?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll just add most of it's in the, can you hear me? Most of it's in the letter already. I'll just add that, sitting on the PPG for 7+ months, this is exactly what we tried to avoid. When we made our recommendations, there was a lot of thoughtful discussion and discretion that was used with the recommendations, and we tried to collaborate as much as possible with the stakeholders, the elected officials, everyone involved, so that we could come out with a CRB that had teeth. So this is exactly what we tried to avoid. And we also tried to conduct a financial analysis of the costs surrounding, because we knew that would be a major issue when this rolled out, but we were denied that opportunity during our review process. So that's all I have to say on that, and I'll yield my time to the second vice.
Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. This is Sharice, and I think that the Criminal Justice Committee has done a really great job of outlining the issues that are extant to this. I'm disappointed, but unfortunately not surprised at how this rolled out. I think that when you want to avoid being accountable to the community that you serve, these are the kinds of things that you do. It is my understanding that what is being proposed by the county right now doesn't even reach the level of what the state has lined up in statute to occur with our civilian review boards. And I support the idea of the county holding off on making any decisions on this until it can be well thought out and well prepared. It doesn't make sense to do this just to check a box.
Thank you, Madam Second Vice. To our third Vice President.
Good evening, everyone. This is Michael Heminger. Just to echo what's already been said, our county leaders made a commitment to us last year in the height of racial tensions that there would be an equitable review process and implementation process. They have not followed through on their commitment. What we're asking for is not new. We're not asking for anything that's groundbreaking. All we're asking for is complete transparency and an independent oversight body. As you can imagine, communities of color, their trust has been completely trampled on. We have incidents right here in Arlington that need to be reviewed. We're not asking to do anything extraordinary. Our friends over in Alexandria have already done this. I think we can all agree on this call, it's common sense. If there's nothing to hide, then you know what, we'll all be in good shape. But if there are things that are hidden and there are things that need to come to light, then communities of color are owed that trust. And that's all we're asking for from the county leadership. Again, we're not asking for anything groundbreaking. We can look at our neighbors in Alexandria and across our great nation. There are many great examples of what this can look like. And here in Arlington, we expect the county board and we expect the county leadership to include all stakeholders. And with that, I'll yield it back to you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Third Vice President. We're a little bit ahead of schedule, and that's always good. We can talk extensively about CRB, and I'll just close. A lot of folks really don't understand the gravity of this ordinance. And if it's implemented as is, the impact, the lack of impact that it will have in our communities is toothless. It's a shame, actually. And to what Mike's talked about, it's a slap in the face. Now, people may say, well, this is how we interpret it. No, read it. Read what it does. Nothing. It's more of the same. And that's not what this community, nor our people who have been, I'm not even gonna get into that, who have been trampled upon for decades by failed policies, need at this moment. Don't put on a shirt. Don't come join the NAACP and say you're doing all of this if you're not willing to have the courage to take the necessary steps to put forth substantive change. It's empty rhetoric, it's performative, and we don't have time for that. That's why the Virginia State Conference is not tolerating it. We're not going to tolerate it. And if we have to march, if we have to picket, we'll do whatever we have to do, because it's not about just the first vice president, the second vice president, the third vice president, or even Spain. This is about our community. And the elected leaders who say they're progressive and everything's looked at through an equity prism, where everything's equitable, then you need to look at the people that have been affected the most by these policies. They're the one that's telling you to change it. That's who you listen to, not the unions. We can still be friends at the end, but they shouldn't be the ones writing this ordinance. And I got a feeling that's what's been going on. With that being said, we'll figure it all out. Jamie, Megan, political action. Y'all ready? They're smiling, so I guess they are. Yep. Jamie, I think you sent me a message about chat. I think chat is not disabled. You can still do your thing over there.
You're muted, Mr. President.
I'm sitting here yanking. You probably didn't hear anything I said. It's okay. Are y'all ready? Mute. I mean, the chat function is not disabled, I don't believe. Do I need to do the introduction? You want to go ahead and do your part first?
Either way, you let me know.
Y'all go ahead.
All right. Well, welcome everybody to our structured dialogue on issues of race in our community. We have the Democratic primary candidates for House of Delegates, the Democratic primary candidates for County Board, and the Democratic Caucus candidates for School Board. I do want to remind everyone that the NAACP is a strictly nonpartisan organization. The Political Action Committee's mission is focused on voter engagement and civic participation. So we host this event in the spirit of promoting voter turnout and increasing voter education. We do not endorse any candidates or any party whatsoever, but we do want to get this information out prior to the Democratic School Board Caucus and the June primaries. We will also be sure to host a forum where we will get to meet all the candidates of all the parties before the general election in the fall. And as part of that, we'll also produce a candidate questionnaire that'll give general election candidates a chance to discuss their plans and initiatives in more detail. So stay tuned for that. I'd first like to thank the general members who submitted questions for our discussion tonight. Many of those you will find are incorporated in our program, and we thank you very much for your engagement. Now it is my great honor to introduce our esteemed moderator for tonight's program. Wilma Jones is a resident of Halls Hill. She is a fourth generation Arlingtonian. She is a civic activist, a published author, an accomplished speaker, and a top performing director of corporate information sales. She really is a treasure to this community, and she is the perfect moderator for our discussion today. We thank Wilma for her time and for her leadership in tonight's program. I'm going to chat, or Jamie actually just dropped a link in the chat, so we invite you to check out her publications and learn more about the community that you call home. So without further ado, Wilma Jones, I turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Megan. And thank you to the NAACP for asking me to take on such a important role this evening to moderate the panel. And I'm very excited about it. I definitely want to hear more about the issues that are important to the NAACP members and what our candidates think about them. So let's start off with some ground rules. Tonight is about voter engagement on importance to the NAACP. It's a chance for us to hear what each candidate would do and has done on the issues of importance to our organization. So in that spirit, let's go through a couple of ground rules. To all attendees and participants, no campaigning in the chats. We are here to listen and engage, not promote or endorse. Our Political Action Committee will be moderating the chat to be sure we do not see campaigning or endorsing of candidates. This is an educational event. Second, to our candidates, we ask that you please respect the time limits. Our Political Action Committee co-chairs will send chat messages with 1 minute and 30 seconds remaining. At that time, we're going to move forward and we'll ask that you cease your remarks. And also to our candidates, please be directly responsive to the questions. We want to make this program unique to the NAACP's mission, priorities, and values. And members of our general membership have sent in questions that our Political Action Committee have carefully reviewed and included the ones that they felt were most appropriate for the time limit that we have. So we want to stay laser focused on those questions and avoid your standard messaging. Again, our goal is voter education and voter engagement. And in that spirit, our Political Action Committee will be sharing with all attendees in the chat information about how to vote and when to vote in the June primaries. So let's start off with the House of Delegates for the 49th District and the Democratic primary. Karishma and Alfonso, are you all on?
I am.
Great, thank you for
Hey,
joining.
everybody.
Alfonso, is that you?
That's me.
Great, great. So thank you both for joining us. We're really excited to hear what you have to say. So let's start with a question about your work experience and proven record on issues of race, equity, and inclusion. Now, we're going to drop links to your websites in the chat so that people will be able to go there and look on their own for information. But for tonight, what do you want our members to know about your political or work experience advocating on behalf of issues of racial justice and equity? You each have 2.5 minutes, and let's start with Karishma.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for inviting me here today. My name is Karishma Mehta, and I'm a preschool teacher and candidate for the 49th District, which includes the historic neighborhoods of Johnson's Hill and Green Valley. My story is the story of so many people who live in the 49th District and across Virginia who have skipped meals and worked for starvation wages just to survive. This district is my home. I knew when I took on the responsibility of running for office to represent all the people here, I needed to show up and listen to my neighbors. When I walk by Walter Reed Community Center or Mount Olive Baptist Church, I'm reminded that running to represent South Arlington means you're an advocate for generations of Black people who have been denied a voice in Richmond. I've been that voice in my workplace, fighting for students and their families, and I'll do that as your delegate. Now, I'll concede, I haven't held elected office, so my experience isn't typical. But every day when I wake up, I get ready for my class and I become a frontline worker. Most preschool teachers are Black and brown women. During a pandemic, school administrators at my preschool were not interested in protecting the rights of their workers or our young students. So I began the work of organizing my coworkers into a union. I had the hard conversations with Black and brown women struggling to keep their families safe, pay the bills, and all while afraid of retaliation from our boss. We organized and we won. This is the mindset that I'd be bringing to address the racial inequities that we see in the 49th District. When we know what's happening, when we know our history here, we can tackle the core of our problem. Landlords didn't just start pushing out Black families this year. Black kids in Arlington aren't just now being suspended or expelled or imprisoned. Higher Black maternal mortality rates didn't just suddenly appear in the pandemic. These inequities have always existed and are evidence of a system that has commodified our right to live. We need to fundamentally rethink who Arlington is really working for and organize people to push back against the deep-rooted inequities in the 49th. That means removing police from our schools, ending cash bail, passing a universal healthcare system, and ensuring that our Black community can build wealth and own a home in our district. Black men deserve to grow old. Black children deserve their childhood. Black women deserve dignity and respect. That's what I'll fight for. And that's why I'm asking for your vote on June 8th. I look forward to answering all of your other questions tonight. Thank you so much.
Wilma, can I go forward?
Yes, please. I'm sorry. For some reason, it wouldn't let me unmute, so I won't mute myself again. Yes, Alfonso, please answer the question. We'd love to hear your response.
Thank you. Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here tonight. As a member of the Arlington NAACP, it's always an honor for me to be with you. A lot of folks here knew my mom. She devoted her life as an ESL HILT guidance counselor in Arlington Public Schools to helping low-income and immigrant children continue their education after high school. Today, as a result of her efforts, over 1,000 kids who could have been forgotten are college graduates. My dad was raised in a small village in the Andes Mountains of Venezuela, one of 22 kids from the same parents. He came to this country at the age of 19, undocumented, with $270 in his pocket and the dream of a better life. He worked as a busboy and a waiter. He learned English. He graduated from Northern Virginia Community College when I was 5, then taking one course a semester. He graduated from George Mason 1 month before I graduated from high school. My parents each worked 2-3 jobs at a time to provide for us. They instilled in me the values of hard work and public service that drive me every day. As your delegate, I've been a champion for our values in Richmond, fighting to make Virginia a place where we lift everyone up and leave no one behind. Over the last 10 years, I've been the patron, co-patron, or the chief co-patron of over 150 bills signed into law, addressing everything from small business procurement to protecting immigrants to tenant protections, criminal justice reform, expanding temporary assistance for needy families, and sensible gun violence prevention. I'm especially proud of my legislation that created in-state tuition for Dreamers and my bill that created the Virginia Affordable Housing Trust Fund that served as the backstop for eviction prevention during the pandemic and provided housing for thousands of families, including hundreds of families in the 49th District. And as the House Majority Whip, I'm honored to have, among other things, increased teacher salaries, secured a dedicated source of revenue for Metro, worked to close the school-to-prison pipeline, created the first state Voting Rights Act in the South, and perhaps most importantly, expanded Medicaid and healthcare protections to 500,000 Virginia families, including 45,000 in our region. Here's the issue. For far too long, Virginia and the nation, Black and brown Virginians have been denied equal justice under the law. As your delegate, I've worked to end systemic and structural racism and make Virginia a more fair and equitable place. As you all know, as I do, that inequity still exists in all parts of our society. That's why as delegate, I've worked to reform our criminal justice system, get rid of Jim Crow era laws in the Virginia Code, and provide support for minority and new American populations during the pandemic. And as the House Majority Whip, I've helped develop and guide our agenda, especially last summer and this year, as we address criminal justice reform and racial inequity. I've helped ban no-knock warrants, police chokeholds, and the militarization of police departments. I secured the votes in the House to abolish the death penalty. We've legalized marijuana for adults and passed automatic expungement. We've declared racism a public health crisis, and we've advocated for pay laws regardless of gender or race. We have fundamentally changed Virginia as it relates to, I'm sorry, it's my, look forward to the conversation this evening. Thank you, Wilma. I apologize.
Thank you. And thank you for self-policing yourself on the time, because I was just about to say something.
Thank you, Mehta.
So, let's go to a really important subject, qualified immunity. That's an urgent priority of the NAACP. And our Criminal Justice Committee and our members want to know what specific strategy you will follow to end qualified immunity and on what timeline. And we want to let you know that we feel like just casting a vote isn't going to be enough. We want to hear steps that you're going to take and what you're going to do to overcome those barriers that you know you're going to have from the unions and the like in terms of ending that important issue. And we'll start with you, Alfonso, Delegate Lopez.
Well, I voted for qualified immunity. I helped secure votes for its passage in the House. We passed qualified immunity in the House of Delegates over the summer during the special session.
You mean you passed ending it?
Passed ending qualified immunity over the summer in the House of Delegates. We did it again this regular session. The issue, and I see some of my friends from the Senate here who have supported the bill as well, but is the state Senate. We have gotten this bill out of the House. I helped secure the votes to get it passed. I fought for it in the caucus, and I've spoken out for it in rallies, at speeches. It's important. It's something we need to address. The issue right now is a few members of, or actually 2 members of the state Senate, and actually getting them to switch their vote. Now, there are several ways you can do that. I'm sorry, Wilma, you were going to say something?
That was just what I was going to ask, is how are you going to do, what strategy are you going to use to do that?
It's 4 or 5 things you have to do. I mean, as the Majority Whip, my job is to help not just coordinate messaging, but also to help convince the correctness of a position as opposed to another position. So working with leadership, working with the senior leadership team that I'm a member of, we will once again sit down with some of these members, talk about why it's important, talk about the issues not only from a statewide perspective, but also from the perspectives of these state senators in their backyard, and give them facts, numbers, and data to support the position for to ending qualified immunity because of how it affects their district. And you know, at the end of the day, you know, I love all of my fellow Democrats in the House. Democrats in the House and in the Senate, but on some of these issues, the rightness of it is too strong. We have to call out even our friends on these issues sometimes and make sure that we get these kinds of you know, sensible legislation passed.
Thank you. Karishma, could you tell us what you would do to work to end qualified immunity in the state?
Of course. First off, let me say that I'm the only person in this race who has not taken a penny of money from the police, from the sheriff's associations, and I'm very proud of that fact, because if we are going to have these hard conversations on policing, on ending qualified immunity, we need to ensure that our delegates are not being influenced by the police and the system of policing that has affected so many of our Black and Brown community members. As far as working with other legislators, I am an organizer, I am an educator, and I bring those tools in my toolbox with me wherever I go. And so whether I'm an organizer or a delegate in the General Assembly, being able to organize from the outside and bring in community partners to put pressure on these state senators and delegates who are not signing on to important pieces of legislation is equally crucial to the relationships that you have in the General Assembly. And so we not only need an inside influence, an advocate for the Black community and the mission of the NAACP, but we need outside community partners like the NAACP and like Black and Brown organizers who are doing that work in our community as we speak to ensure that we can put enough pressure in the right places to impact this kind of legislation and ensure that it's successful and landing on the governor's desk. And so while my opponent has worked to give raises for police in a pandemic, I would make sure that we're utilizing all of our power as a community to put pressure on legislators to ensure that the legislation we need to impact our community in a positive way is actually passed.
Thank you for that perspective. Appreciate it. Now, let's go to our next question. Now, both our Housing Committee and many of our registered general members have raised questions about housing. Affordable housing for low and moderate income families demands state investments to expand housing choice and to preserve the existing housing that we're at risk of losing. But money alone will not be enough without accountability mechanisms and cultural changes in our community. Now, in addition to budget allocations, what concrete changes do we need at the local and state level to how we approach fair and equitable housing? I mean, is it desegregation in residential communities? How will you lead Arlington forward on these housing issues? Karishma, let's have your perspective first, please.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for this question. As a renter on Columbia Pike and a tenant organizer, this is very important to me. We've already seen at the Serrano Apartments and across South Arlington that companies like AHC and JBG Smith can't be trusted to ensure housing as a dignified human right. In fact, as recently as 2017, my opponent introduced legislation that makes tenants financially responsible for pest infestations rather than holding the landlord accountable. A real-time implication of anti-tenant legislation is happening and unfolding right at the Serrano Apartments, where children and their families are living in rat-infested apartments, unable to cook and sleep in dignified conditions. But this shouldn't be a surprise because Black and Brown residents have always been deprioritized. When government officials and real estate developers could buy up Freedman's Village, they did. When many of the people in Freedman's Village diaspora developed enclaves in Arlington, developers and the government bought up that land too. And now as they look in Arlington for the last pieces of land to build on, they're turning to Johnson's Hill, they are turning to Green Valley and Halls Hill. And every time the government and the developers have tried to exploit and displace families, the Black community has stood up and organized to fight back. So we need that movement here again in the 49th. When we fight for our rights, we can guarantee homes for all people, pass universal rent control, ensure a pathway to home ownership that doesn't prioritize wealthy developers, and ensure an affordable housing trust fund that doesn't give 80% of the taxpayer money to developers and only 20% of that to ending homelessness. When I talked to a 15-year-old's father in Green Valley, he told me his home had been in his family for generations and that he wondered if he'd be able to pass it on to his children. He asked me, will Black people still have a place in Arlington in 20 years? And I promised that if we work together in solidarity, we could protect future generations from displacement. And so I don't take a penny of money from corporate developers and landlords that are displacing and gentrifying our communities. And I know that when I get to Richmond, developers know that I won't sell out the families that live here and have always called Arlington home.
Thank you. Thank you. Alfonso, your perspective, please.
Thank you for that question. My legislation in 2013 created the Virginia Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And for many years, the Republican majority used it as a bargaining chip and then repeatedly underfunded it, giving it between 6 and 8 million in each biennium. However, working with Governors McAuliffe and Northam, we were able to significantly increase funding. Until today, the trust fund has $125.7 million. More importantly, I'm very proud of the role the trust fund played during the pandemic. With folks out of work and housing instability increased, the worst thing that could have happened would have been to have families kicked out of their homes in the middle of a pandemic. The trust fund was used as an important backstop to the rental and mortgage relief program that we created over the summer, coupled with the $524 million Virginia received for eviction prevention efforts under the Federal CARES Act. The programs effectively addressed eviction, housing instability, and homelessness needs last year. We also, on top of that, this past session passed the affordable housing tax credit. And one stat that which is helping us build more affordable housing units. And this is not just across the state in every corner of the Commonwealth, it's several hundred units in the 49th district. One stat that I'm incredibly proud of is this. In 2020, during the worst pandemic in 100 years, fewer people were kicked out of their homes or evicted than in 2019. As Governor Northam said, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund was a vital part of that success. And I actually visited the Serrano with Voice, an amazing organization in our community, just this past week. And I actually visited several homes and I've seen the infestation. I've reached out to the AHC. I've communicated to activists. I've worked with the community. And I know exactly what's happening in the western part of Columbia Pike with some of these affordable housing units. It's horrible. It's horrible. I've seen the fact that there's been you've got not just rat infestation, but you've got no heat, air conditioning. You've got some molds just being painted over, water going through the roof. These are unacceptable. And what we need to be doing is working with the community, working with activists, working with folks like, and I was with, I was on the tour with President Spain of the NAACP, seeing firsthand what's been going on. So working together, I have a letter in the works already that I'm working on with folks like Luis and Gabriela Uro, and to make it clear that this is unacceptable and what the Housing Commission has called for. Their demands need to be put into effect immediately.
I've got to cut you.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. But as we move forward, I may stop you to kind of steer you back into the meat of the question, sure. Because we understand and we can see from your websites and the like, your campaign literature, kind of what you've done. We kind of want to focus on what are you going to do next? What's the next step? So in that light, let's go to environmental justice. And our Environmental Justice Committee asks, what concrete plans would you bring to the House of Delegates to address air quality in our community? Alfonso, you can go first.
Well, I've been working on environmental policy and environmental law since the early 90s when I worked at the Council on Environmental Quality in the Clinton White House. And I was with the Physicians for Social Responsibility as the associate director working on the National Ambient Air Quality Standards and the Clean Air Act reauthorization. So I've been working on clean air, safe drinking water, livable communities legislation, and environmental policy for literally decades now. I was also the founder of the Virginia Environment Renewable Energy Caucus. But to go specifically to what you're talking about in terms of environmental justice, my bills over the last few years have finally addressed environmental justice and made it a part of the marching orders of the DEQ for the first time ever. Also, I had a constitutional amendment that I introduced this year that basically said, in the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies, it is the policy of the Commonwealth to follow the principles of environmental justice, including the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of every person, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income. Further, it's the policy of the Commonwealth to ensure that no population, especially minority, low-income, or historically economically disadvantaged communities, faces higher levels or greater impacts of pollution and climate change than other populations. So this is the conservation section of the state constitution and a brand new section 5 that would go forth and finally address environmental justice. And what does this mean? This is the hammer we need for every court case addressing historically disadvantaged communities in Virginia. So I've been at the forefront of this effort since the early time in my tenure in the House of Delegates, talking about environmental justice, talking about national ambient air quality standards, talking about these issues, and bringing national experts as well as statewide experts together to communicate and try to craft legislation moving forward. I'm incredibly proud of the work I've done in this area. I have the highest A+ rating from the Virginia League of Conservation Voters. And I'm always—
Let me stop you once again. And I want to go back to your hammer that you talked about. So when is the hammer going to be approved so you can start putting it down?
We have, well, legislatively, we've taken the first steps to, make it part of what the DEQ's mandate is. I mean, their mandate didn't include addressing climate change a few years ago. Now it does. But what we need to do, in my opinion, is pass my constitutional amendment and make that a part of the state constitution so that every attorney who's taking Dominion or Appalachian Power or any of these companies to task and taking them to the courts, this gives them the ability to say, the Virginia State Constitution says that this is something we need to address.
Thank you. Thank you. Karishma, your perspective on what you will do, what concrete plans to bring to the House of Delegates to address air quality in our community.
Of course. I've lived in the 49th district for about a decade now. And what I can tell you is that our problem in our environmental quality is that we have not enough funding invested in public transit infrastructure, and we have become a fossil fuel reliant transit economy. And so simultaneous to taking on all of the other environmental issues that we have in Virginia, we have to be bold and pass legislation to ensure green, sustainable transit that is accessible to all of our communities in Northern Virginia, to remove that reliance on fossil fuels, to remove the reliance on cars that are polluting our air, and to ensure that people continue to have expanded access to that public transit. Simultaneous to those things, it's why in the Virginia General Assembly, I will fight for a Green New Deal and listen to the scientists that are telling us that we only have until 2030 and 2035 at the latest to reach 100% renewable energy. We know that environmental injustice has impacted Black and Brown frontline communities the worst. And it's because of a fossil fuel industry and a privatized healthcare industry that has refused to take responsibility for the health problems that we have when it comes to quality of air and the quality of life for our children and families. And so, my opponent supported the Clean Economy Act. It was disastrous. It once again prioritized Dominion Energy's monopoly power and resulted in ratepayers paying millions of dollars out of their own pocket in a pandemic. So there are colossal ongoing implications of climate inaction, and we desperately need elected officials, organized labor, and a working coalition to take on the fossil fuel industry. I'm a teacher. I want my students to inherit a healthy, habitable planet. And right now we have a delegate that takes openly fossil fuel money from Washington Gas and Appalachian Power. And I don't think we can rely on a delegate like that.
Let's stay focused on what you will do, though. That's what we want to hear tonight.
Of course.
We want to hear, what are the concrete things? You told us a little bit. You've got about 15 seconds.
Okay. And so, my investments would be in public transit infrastructure and a Green New Deal for Virginia that centers working class people and Black and Brown frontline communities and invest money into those communities for jobs first before any other area. So, to be able to address the climate crisis and the quality of air situation, we have to pass a Green New Deal.
Thank you. Thank you for coming back over. And we definitely wanted to hear that part. Now, let's talk about a really important issue, marijuana legislation. Marijuana legislation has historically had a complex effects on communities of color. We've been hit the hardest by the decades of the war on drugs, criminalization, and still ongoing racial disparities and enforcement. I mean, we saw what had to happen, what Governor Northam had to do because police were still continuing to use the fact that, marijuana could get a ticket to impact Black and brown people. So we've legalized the sale, we've decriminalized it. We are making important first steps, but these things require careful management and vigilance. And we've seen that in what's happened in other states. So we want to know that communities of color in Virginia are actually going to benefit from these reforms. So what steps would you take to be sure the benefits of legalization reach communities of color and that our residents have access to the resources and tools necessary to be a part of that industry and to license? I mean, and also, if you have time, those other things are important, but just lastly, have we done enough to remedy the disproportionate harms of criminalization? And Karishma, you're up first.
Thank you so much. On any given night in Virginia, our prisons hold over 28,000 people, and 46% of them have not even been convicted of a crime. So while a lot of us have reason to celebrate the legalization of marijuana on July 1st, tens of thousands of Virginians will stay incarcerated. This is justice delayed. We need to keep pushing forward so that legalized cannabis centers racial equity first, through full expungement of records for incarcerated people, through a just transition for all people returning to their communities. That means ensuring healthcare, housing, a good education, and job opportunities for the people who have been harmed by the war on drugs. Rather than prioritizing commercial markets and profits for the wealthy few like this legalization bill has done, we need to continue dismantling the prison industrial complex and mass incarceration of Black and brown people here in Arlington as well. And so, I'll be honest with you, when you talk about, have we done enough to address criminalization? I don't think we have, because we incarcerate more of our people than any other country on earth. And at the same time, we deny people the right to those jobs, the right to healthcare, the right to housing and education. And police don't keep our communities safe. We know this. And so we need to invest in life-affirming institutions. We understand that the American punishment system is not broken. It's functioning exactly how it was designed to. And that is to continue targeting, brutalizing, incarcerating, and forcing labor of Black people, and by extension, all people.
Thank you. Alfonso, you're on mute.
After a year and a half, I still, I helped secure the votes to get marijuana legalization for adults passed in the House of Delegates. I helped secure votes to end stops and searches based on marijuana odor. I've supported automatic expungement of records and the criminalization of marijuana possession and former crimes. We have, as a General Assembly, fundamentally changed the face of Virginia as it relates to criminal justice reform during the 2020 special and during the 2021 General Assembly session, creating citizen review boards, jury sentencing reform, increasing prosecutorial discretion, expanding deferred dispositions, ending searches and seizures based on marijuana and other pretextual stops. Here's the thing. We were trying to accomplish in 5 months what other states do in 5 years in terms of marijuana legalization for adults. But here's also the thing. After many years of advocacy, we've done it. And we've gotten rid of what is a fundamentally I would believe, racist approach to this issue. And so what we're doing is we came together to create a pathway forward for the legalization of small amounts of marijuana for personal possession by adults beginning on July 1st. This is a dramatic shift from the decades of failed war on drugs policies that served more to criminalize young people and people of color than to keep our communities safe. And this legislation eliminates criminal penalties for personal possession up to 1 ounce of marijuana by an adult over 21 years of age. So the buying and selling of marijuana will remain illegal until 2024, when we have the regs in place. And but we're going to give the newly created Virginia Cannabis Control Authority enough time to establish the regulatory and licensing structure that will govern the sale of cannabis products in the Commonwealth. Importantly,
I'm going to stop you again.
Social equity. Sorry, I thought I was getting to it.
You got 40 seconds. I want you to tell us though, what are the specific things? I mean, we know what's in the legislation, but in the next steps, how are you going to make sure that our residents have access to be able to make this industry also positively affect us? Give you about 30 seconds.
So the bill contains social equity provisions that will provide support and resources to person communities that have been historically and disproportionately affected by drug enforcement. So what does that mean? That means vertical integration. And so that means access for historically marginalized communities. And it also means addressing banking. So upfront costs. And you can also, I would think, by allowing some of the big companies that are coming in right now to do it earlier, to set aside some of the tax dollars from that, specifically for that initial funding to help stand up a lot of these smaller companies. Because it takes $1 million just for dispensing center. Okay. And so what you can do is you can tax it properly, you can tax the big boys properly to then create those small companies and other growing companies to, communities of color that have been affected disproportionately by drug enforcement in the past, and actually bring those folks into the business.
All right, thank you. Now, we have only a few minutes left, but we do want to ask one last question about education. Illiteracy is huge in the state of Virginia. It was asked, we wonder whether you all know what it costs and what is your plan to close the state literacy gaps? And I just want to say this is a matter that's really important to the historically Black communities in Arlington, because we have generations of families, Black families in Arlington whose children have been graduated, but they can't get into college. They don't have the skills to get great jobs. What are you guys going to do about addressing these long-term challenges for children of color so that they have opportunities for careers and things like other Arlington children do? And you got 2.5 minutes, and I'm going to hold you tight. We are at Alfonso, you're first.
We need to fundamentally change how we fund schools in Virginia. We need to fundamentally change the tax structure about how we fund schools in Virginia. We need to make sure that the kind of quality schools that we have in Arlington are in every corner of the Commonwealth. We also need to pay our teachers a basic wage. I'm very proud of the fact that we've increased teacher salaries the last couple for at least a couple times, and the next one is going into effect. It's a 5% increase on July 1st. We have addressed SOLs, but the thing is that we do not invest enough in our teachers and our school systems, not just in Northern Virginia, where we're incredibly lucky, but in every corner of the Commonwealth. So I think we need to have, finally, a conversation about funding school construction, funding of school systems, public school systems, in a way that some other states do that we simply don't do right now.
Thank you. Karishma, you can close us out with your answer.
Thank you. Let me tell you something as a teacher. Throwing money at the school system and the problem will not fix our literacy rates. As a teacher, I've seen firsthand the inequities in my classroom and the education system. Many of us invested in building that equitable school system have questioned whether integration and equality in our schools really happened under Brown versus Board. If we consider the funding crisis, firing of Black and brown teachers in droves, and the corporate reforms that have resulted in high stakes, racist, standardized testing, police in our schools that have led to push out, and a lunch debt crisis that leaves our students hungry all day rather than invested in their education, then the question really is, was it actually designed for students, for all students to succeed? I'd say the answer is no. And so we do need massive investments in our public schools. But my vision for rebuilding our school system is ensuring that we have free, comprehensive preventative health clinics that ensure physical, sick visits and other needs that children don't otherwise receive outside of schools. If we demand our taxpayer money be used to uplift our community, we can ensure mental health counselors. We can build partnerships with trade unions and worker cooperatives that uplift our students and teach them the skills of the next generation, rather than partnering with privatized and exploitative corporations. And we can and must end exclusionary discipline policies that prevent students from succeeding. Study upon study shows that expulsions and suspensions and these exclusionary discipline policies make it harder and harder for our children to graduate and to have the education that they deserve. And so we need to create a blueprint for a school system that doesn't spirit murder our Black and brown children, as Dr. Bettina Love says. And so I've seen Black babies expelled and suspended from preschool as little as 2 years old. And so instead of investing millions of dollars into criminalizing our children, we need to use our tax dollars and our collective power as a community to build a school system that truly works for all of our children. And as a delegate, I will fight for that every single day.
Thank you. Thank you both. This has been very informative for me, and I hope for the rest of the NAACP members and guests who are on. On behalf of the Political Action Committee, we want to thank you both for sharing with us your perspectives and your plans for what you would like to do if you are elected, or if you are, win the Democratic primary in order to go into the general election in the fall. So thank you again. At this time, thanks. At this time, we're going to segue over to our county board candidates for the next 30 minutes. Takis, Karantonis, I hope I pronounced your last name right, and Choun. So one thing I want to say, the NAACP branch wants to remind everybody that we will be hosting a full forum in the fall to hear from the candidates from all the parties. For this election, however, we do have an independent candidate who has already reached out to the NAACP proactively, Audrey Clement. Audrey will be invited to participate in the full fall forum in anticipation of the general election, when her name will be on the ballot. But in the interest of fairness, we did invite her to come to introduce herself for just a brief couple of moments. So Audrey, are you on the line?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Do you all want to? There you are. You are now promoted from a video perspective, and you have 3 minutes to do an introduction for us.
Okay, thank you to the NAACP for inviting me to this forum. I'm Audrey Clement, the independent candidate for Arlington County Board. My strong commitment to racial justice is evident from the fact that I served as a fellow with the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation in the 100th Congress, while researching a dissertation on the Black Caucus. I successfully defended the dissertation entitled Congressional Black Caucus, Its Representational Role, and received a doctorate in political science from Temple University in 1993. As a 17-year Westover resident, longtime civic activist, and past member of the Transportation Commission, I'm running for county board because it has pushed harmful policies that directly implicate its commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion. These policies have resulted in overcrowded schools, gentrification, loss of green space, and a 10-year average annual effective tax rate increase that is more than double the rate of inflation. On April 20th, County Board adopted a tax package that, together with rising assessments, increased the effective real estate tax rate by 6%. Even as other Northern Virginia jurisdictions lowered their tax rates in recognition of the disproportionate impact of COVID on people of color. Another board priority which belies its commitment to racial equity is so-called missing middle housing, multifamily dwellings in single-family home neighborhoods. Missing middle is a euphemism for upzoning that will not make housing more affordable. Instead, it will inflate land values, resulting in higher housing prices, overcrowded schools, more traffic congestion, loss of tree canopy, increased runoff, and more air pollution. The county has packaged upzoning as the solution to racial inequality, despite the fact that few minorities will actually qualify for mortgages on upzoned lots. Finally, while I do agree with the recommendations of the Police Practices Working Group, including institution of a civilian review board with subpoena power and a mobile crisis response unit, I oppose symbolic gestures. Changing street names and logos distracts people of color from the real issues confronting them, namely inferior employment and educational opportunities, as well as racial profiling, police brutality, and environmental injustice. If elected, I pledge to seek immediate tax relief for residents and businesses. Say yes to affordable housing and no to missing middle upzoning. Say yes to social justice reforms and no to symbolic gestures. If you share my agenda, then spread the word about my candidacy, donate to my campaign, and help make the Arlington way more than an empty phrase. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Audrey. We appreciate that. Now, let's kick off with the two Democratic candidates for county board for the nomination. First of all, just like with the other candidates, the Political Action Committee will share your full bios and links to your website in the chat for our membership to review more fully. But one of the things we're going to do now is we're going to talk about what you guys have been doing in the Arlington political and civic scene, because you've been around for a few years. And one of our attendees, when registering, asked if you could share what have been your biggest accomplishments in advancing racial equity in Arlington County. We want to know just how have you improved the lives of our communities of color. Takis, you're on first for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Wilma. It's great to be here. It's a really very, very good dialogue. Thank you for that and for structuring that and guiding us through that. I will just go back to what I did as an immigrant when I landed with my wife, Lida, 15 years ago here in Arlington. And it was in the middle of Columbia Heights, in the middle of Columbia Pike, the most diverse community. And it was for us extremely difficult to actually find housing, to be able to afford housing here, to be able to put down roots. Therefore, my number one impression of Arlington was fighting for housing, understanding the housing challenge, understanding the housing crisis, and fighting for housing. Most importantly, immediately when we arrived here, we began to build relationships with our neighborhood, with the civic organizations, with local businesses. Since you asked about my biggest accomplishment, something that I'm really proud of is that I could take the job to lead the Columbia Pike Revitalization Organization. There's, the CPRO. I led CPRO for about 6 years. And during these 6 years, we got communities together along Columbia Pike, the most diverse communities in Arlington, the most lagging behind communities in Arlington, to organize, to help us to get through the neighborhood's form-based code, a zoning tool that created more than 14 new buildings where there was zero development before, and many of them were really affordable housing buildings, where we could put a stop on the bleeding of market rate affordable housing that over 20 years was washed away from Arlington. Other speakers talked about that. We could create the conditions under which public money and nonprofit developers could come back and begin to replace the lost housing affordability in the corridor that I lived. I'm very proud of that. And I'm specifically proud, not only about the results, but specifically proud about the community network that was created to support that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Chanda, your time.
Thank you, everybody. My number one accomplishment, it's running for office. Running for office is the number one way to speak truth to power, literal power. And I've run multiple times, and each time I've been the only candidate of color. That's why I've done it at the base. And 3 times, if I had not run, there would have been no election. And Arlington's history, when we think about and look at our racial inequities, all the injustices of the past, it's at the root of it is power, and connected to power is the money. I brought up in my current run, and I brought it up in various conversations and public forums and face-to-face with electors over the past several years, is can we update Arlington's form of government to be more representative and responsive? And if we look at its history, Arlington's county board, county manager form of government has been coming a lot, and NAACP activities and correspondence are, what is the county manager doing? What's the board doing? It was created in 1930. It was created in 1930 at the height of Jim Crow. It was created to go from electing our local representatives at large versus by district. It was created so that Black neighborhoods, minority neighborhoods of Arlington could no longer elect representatives of color. Because back then, 100 years ago, Arlington was 40% Black. There were sitting members of the county board that were Black, such as
Chanda, I'm going to stop you. I want you to go back and tell us in terms of, are there any things that you can say that you've concretely done? I don't know whether it's social media, whether it's in part of your campaign, but what have you done that has actually impacted our communities of color? I mean, I think that's what we want to know.
Okay, yes. So I'll break it down. Yes, you brought up social media. I live every day. I have a full-time job, I have multiple stuff, but every day I work to amplify all the different communities in Arlington that don't have a voice. I bring up communities that are no longer here, be it by sharing history, by sharing, past accomplishments, be it the Black community, the Asian community, the Latino community, even down to the Native American community. I want to write the record on who has been here before and what they've done, because we're not going to solve our economic problems. We're not going to solve our social problems. We're not going to solve our political problems if we don't know the truth of what happened before us and who's still here now and who are we leaving behind and who's still invisible.
Thank you. I'm sorry to kind of steer you guys back, but I'm trying to keep you right in the swim lane that the NAACP wants you to negotiate with us. So let's go to a really important question. The housing. Now, the Housing Committee is asking, what kind of concrete and measurable steps would you take as a county board member to affirmatively further fair housing, to desegregate residential communities, and to increase opportunities for residents of color? And I'm going to tell you, I'm particularly concerned about this as a 4th-generation resident of Arlington, and knowing that my 5th and 6th generation family, it's very expensive to live in Arlington. And so when we talk about affordable housing, we're really only talking about rental housing and apartments. When you're talking about what you're going to do, we also want to know, what do you think about the limitations that presents to families, schools, community stability, wealth generation, and on and on. So Chanda, let's start with you this time.
Right. Housing, diversity, segregation. This goes back hundreds of years. Ultimately, we're late in the game. So anybody who says that, all right, we can, adjust this policy and things like that, everything, all the inequities that we have were done on purpose and were done over a long period of time. So number one, money. Money for people already struggling, diverse communities are struggling to live here. We've got some great programs in place, housing grants, assistance, and things like that. but we've got to take it to another level. That's why I propose a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. What happened to that generational wealth? Who was locked out of that? And we've got to right that wrong. There's a lot of money flowing around Arlington now. Amazon's here. There's plenty of philanthropies. I say, let's compensate the people that were discarded from the past. Where the Pentagon sits now, used to be East Arlington, Queen City, a Black community. It was literally bulldozed in the 1940s with little to no compensation. We should compensate those folks, those families who are still here or descendants who are still here, and get them back here to Arlington. Open invitation with money. The same thing with the Black community that used to be up along the Potomac that was bulldozed to make way for George Washington Parkway. So I boldly call for restorative actions and reparations in order to right this wrong. We're not going to, yes, of course, I support other broad housing policies. Let's allow more housing types in different neighborhoods. Let's do away with all the redlining and historic segregation that occurred. But we've got to deal with the money and compensation issue. And this has occurred all across America. Local policy, eminent domain was used to displace minority communities.
Thank you. Interesting perspective. Takis, we would like to hear what you have to say about the housing, affordable housing, and the limitations and things that it presents to our communities of color.
It presents enormous limitations to our community of color because the problem of housing we have today is because we had racial segregation in our zoning in the 30s and before that and after that. So there is absolutely clear that Arlington has a very heavy racial segregation legacy, that it will be very difficult and it will take a lot of effort and community work to reverse completely. But since we're talking about specific things, number one is every budget that we approve every year needs to make progress on reversing housing segregation, needs to invest in housing affordability, needs to invest in affordable home ownership, since I think you, Wilma, mentioned that, needs to invest in everything that sustains affordability, increases the housing supply for an always increasing demand, and pays attention that this supply is affordable and accessible to working people, to Black and brown communities, to minority communities, to immigrants. The second thing is there is a mix. Things are coming together. The initial question was about doing away with housing discrimination in form of fair housing. We still have to do a lot of work in our zoning laws. There are zoning ordinances in our in our historic neighborhoods that are unique to them. As a board member, I have already got rid of a couple of these, and there are more to come. So we have to, you don't need to read The Color of Law to understand how much work this is. The most important thing is to have progressive, responsive, collaborative leadership. And specifically for the historic neighborhoods, Wilma, we have a very heavy historic responsibility to work with these communities. And I know that you understand what I'm saying when I talk about the Fire Station 8 or Astoria Halls Hill. We have a historic responsibility to work to preserve their character and their demographics as good as we can. Money and community engagement in politics.
Well, Takis, thank you for that. But you hit a sore button, but since we're in the middle of the NAACP thing, I'm not going to go into it. But remember that the county wanted to move the fire station. So
yes, I know.
It was your peers, but we won't.
I know.
Now.
And this
we're in the middle.
And this is why I say the community has to be part of this. We have to work with you.
Okay. I'm going to go to the next question because this one is an even more important for many of us. The police. The county manager did not recommend a civilian review board with subpoena authority, as was the recommendation from the police practices group. Was very disappointing to many of us in the communities of color. And in addition, we know that the county budget gives $3 million in funding to the police department for SRO, school resource officers. We've only got 2.5 minutes, but really would like to find out, do you agree with the county manager? Why or why not? And then what steps would you take as a board member in regard to the police practices, the civilian review, and the $3 million for SROs? Takis, you're up first.
Sorry. So to start with the SROs, I'm on the record of having said many times that police has no place in our schools, period, end of story. This is my personal conviction. This is why I would never fund SROs in schools. However, the school system, the Arlington public school system, has a community process on that. I respect the public process in the public school process, in the public school system, and I am awaiting their results. So in any case, this is very important. My personal conviction is against SROs. I do think that these $3 million have to be invested in things that really help the schools, like the counseling, like a lot of things, a lot of services that our students need. But there are elected officials in the school board that need to make these decisions, and there is a robust public process to make these decisions, to help them make these decisions, and I will respect the outcome. Now, on the civilian review board, because these two have been put together, I'm not very happy with what the county manager has presented. I was on the phone with the chair of the county, and I asked for to consider the deferral of the request for advertisement. There are four elements to that. Number one, we have to institute the board. There are a lot of details there, and we have to talk about who is eligible, the members, etc. The second thing is the subpoena power. There are many details to this. I want substantial subpoena power without, caveats and, gray zones. The third is investigative power. This is really critical. A citizen, a resident, has to have the right to go to the board and ask for an investigation. The board has to be empowered and enabled to do this job. And the third one is disciplinary power, on which we need to discuss, as well. So I said many times, and I will repeat that, I'm for a civilian review board that has meaningful subpoena power, has investigative power. This is really basic. This is a key element of the reform, and it's exactly what we need to marry trust with accountability. This works also well for our officers in uniform. This is critical for their own integrity and their own way to reconnect with the community with bonds of trust, and finally see policing from the point of view of the police communities.
Thank you. Chanda?
As I fundamentally disagree with the county manager's proposal for the civilian review board. It's a classic bureaucratic, run the clock move. I've seen this in all the various organizations I've worked and served in the military and business and other community groups. So county board, our elected representatives are the ones who are supposed to fight for us and hold our government bureaucracy accountable. So I hope in tomorrow's meeting that they push against that and don't allow that to happen. That's number one. I mean, I've dealt with this also in the military side, where we're trying to get dealing with our issues of sexual assault and getting the commanders out of the chain of, overseeing our own soldiers. So it's the same thing. We've got to have independent oversight with true powers. In regards to what we can do better use with that money, school resource officers, yes, I'm against them. They should never have been in the schools. I truly believe in peace, and we should not have fully trained, fully armed adults in schools among our children. That sets the stage badly from the start. So that's wrong. We live in a society where there's too much fear, and fear is taken advantage of to grow this police state, this military industrial state. So all over, Department of Homeland Security, just everything, we have these oppressive machines that we need to dismantle. how that money can be better spent. You know, I sit on the Arlington County Fiscal Affairs Advisory Commission. You know, for other folks who don't believe that, you know, who don't believe in the whole justice stuff and peace stuff, just it doesn't make sense fiscally. You know, security can be achieved with very modest but very basic means. Finding out, you know, identifying red flags among our youth. You know, if someone's going through, you know, trouble, you don't need to bring in the security, you bring in the counselors, you bring in loved ones. And that's how we have better schools, healthier population, and, you know, we do away with this police state.
Thank you. So in the interest of time, we're going to have one more question for our county board candidates. And this one is from our Economic Development Committee. How do you plan to support legacy businesses in Arlington? How will you encourage entrepreneurship and support small business creation by founders of color? Takis, you're on first, 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. I very strongly feel for that. I work in this field. I've been working in the field of supporting small businesses almost for my entire time here in the United States as an immigrant. So I proposed that last year, a microloan system, something that Arlington County would fund to support small businesses, women-owned, minority-owned businesses, to provide them access to capital. This is now in the budget guidance, and it will happen. I am working very hard also to find ways to support legacy businesses with other means, like, for example, working carefully to find ways during the pandemic to make it easier for them to expand their business out. If they're a restaurant, to expand their business outside, to have a lower regulatory threshold, to be able to do things that until now have been bureaucratically very difficult. And actually all this bureaucracy, all this red tape has been, supporting their competition, the franchises and all this. Then I'm really very focused on advocacy and a legislative agenda that will push the General Assembly and who we need to push to work against predatory practices of the new online economy. Like, for example, your Grubhub or your Uber Eats, they take 40%, between 35 and 40% of the total of the sale. This is not a way that this is a guaranteed failure for these businesses. So I'm all in. For me, the things that we mentioned now, criminal justice, economic justice, housing justice, political justice, and environmental justice are going together. And economic development for me is, for the very small businesses, is really critical. And this is what I have always worked in, and will continue to do that.
Thank you. Chanda, let's close us out with your perspective.
Money, everything ultimately comes down to money, especially in business. And there's been a great deal of business grants and business loan programs all the way from the local, state to federal level. We've got to make sure that those are reaching, all people, specifically people of color, people, women, and a lot of the, in the beginning of the pandemic, that didn't happen. So that's where we got to step in, government, community, nonprofits, partners, to get more money flowing down to these businesses that have been historically neglected. I have my own experience. I've started a small business. It's located, and employees are all majority hired in what are called historically underutilized business zones, where I live in Buckingham, but also all across America. And we need to highlight these type of programs to get more of these businesses to locate in Columbia Pike, locate in Green Valley, and hire directly from the people. Don't just locate there; they're directly required to hire from people. That's number one. Number two, buy local provisions. When we are, negotiating with Amazon or whatever, let's get them to agree to procure their supplies, their food, their meals for their workers from the people, from these type of businesses. It's a great win for, these big businesses to say that they're supporting communities. A big win for us. And then displacement. We're seeing along Columbia Pike, we're seeing along Green Valley, these redevelopments, old mom and pop stores, old restaurants that people love are getting displaced. We need to have programs in place to support them, either to stay where they are. If there are high rents, let's find ways to negotiate that and help them out. If they want to locate somewhere else, let's give them services to find other good commercial space in Arlington so that they stay here. So we've got to fight to make sure the business we have here stay afloat and be successful. And then we also got to fight to make sure that they don't get displaced. Those are the big challenges for Arlington in the next few years.
Thank you very much. We actually have people who want to ask you much more, but unfortunately, we need to move on to the school board candidates. So thank you very much. And I encourage folks, I know that you will respond if they want to send those questions directly to you. So we thank you for your participation and your engagement. And let's move on to our school board caucus candidates, Mary Kadera and Miranda Turner. So these are our final candidates. The caucus is underway this week, the Democratic Party caucus nomination. So the Political Action Committee is going to include in the chat information about how and where to vote in the caucus. So again, we want to remind everybody that school board seats are strictly nonpartisan. And so this is a partisan endorsement process, not a primary. And because we are nonpartisan, we're in a little bit of a difficult position, but we decided to invite the candidates because historically the Democratic caucus winner has such a strong advantage in the general election. So, but please note that the NAACP is engaging only for purposes of civic education, not to support one party or a partisan process. So on that note, we have 25 minutes. Let's get into it, ladies. First, a general question about racial equity in our school systems. And this one is particularly important to me because I moved my 2 Black boys out of Arlington for 8 years because of issues in the middle schools. So if you're elected, what will you do? What will you commit to do to improve the educational experience of children of color? And just like the other candidates, we're going to share your websites, but we are particularly interested also in the generational passing of Black students in Arlington who come out ill-equipped for careers or college. So again, what will you do? And we're going to start with Mary.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the chance to be here with you. So I began my career as a classroom teacher, and it became quickly apparent to me in my time in the classroom that students were being passed along year to year. And in most cases, these were students of color and students from lower income families. And were being ill-served by a system that was designed to advantage and to be built around students with privilege, whiter and more affluent students. And the expectation was always that the students would adapt to the system rather than the system adapting to meet the needs of our students. And so that became painfully clear to me during my time in the classroom, in talking with community members through this campaign and before this time. It's clear that that still happened. I taught 25 years ago, and we are still in that place where students are being passed along and students are graduating without the skills they need in their adult lives.
I'm pushing everybody to stay in with the question. So what are you committing to do about it?
Absolutely. I'm getting there right now. So here's what, based on that experience, here's what I think we need to do. The first thing I think we need to do is make sure that every student is ready to learn. And what I mean by that is, one, we have to do a better job with APS partnering with community organizations to make sure that our students' basic physical and mental health needs are being met. There's more specifics about this on my website, but in the interest of time, I want to keep moving forward. So the checklist is basic physical and mental needs are being met. Second, and something I feel really passionately about, is school culture. Students do not learn and take the risks that are part of learning unless they're in environments where they feel valued and they feel supported and safe. I support the full removal of SROs from our schools and the redirection of $3 million of funding into the kinds of services that would support the mental and physical and social needs of our students. I also support the full implementation of restorative justice practices at all of our schools as an alternative to exclusionary discipline. We need research-based curriculum and excellent diagnostic tools to support our students academically once we have attended to those more foundational needs I just described. So movement towards structured literacy, which I'm pleased to see is happening in APS, movement to better diagnostic tools like the Dibbles test. All of that in terms of curriculum and support and diagnostics is really critical. The last piece that I want to say is engagement. We cannot teach students of color and students, students from lower income families in a certain way with drill and practice that does not recognize them as human beings who deserve joy and purpose and relevance in their learning. And so the way we teach those students is as important in the research base of what we are teaching them.
Thank you, Mary. Miranda, we'd love to hear your perspective. Exactly what are you going to do for us?
Thank you very much. It's good to be here, and I am getting the message loud and clear. You want me to answer the question directly, so I will. I think the most direct way to address some of the concerns that this community and our community has is to focus on basics like literacy across all demographic groups, all schools, student achievement at the higher grade levels, and to look for disparities in access to all manner of things, which is how we're identifying students who are struggling with learning, with dyslexia, disabilities that need to be identified, inclusion of students with disabilities. White students are included in the general ed population at almost 80% across APS. Black and Latino students are not. I think we need to look at who is in our accelerated courses, look at our graduation rates, and have data on this. Have it be measurable, have it be public, put it out into the sunshine, and let's take a look at it. The definition of equity that resonates with me is what Aaron Gregory has said, which is you've got equity when you cannot predict student outcomes by their membership in a particular demographic group. I think you get to that point and you start approaching that point by having the data there. We don't know what we're doing without the data. We need it out, and we need to make sure that the gaps are narrowing. And I think that this might require some creative and pretty granular use of data. I know that in South Arlington, we often have more transient student populations at all grade levels. You have kids coming in and out of school, sometimes midway through the year. We've got a lot more English learners in South Arlington, and the data needs to be pretty granular so that we can take a look at which teachers are truly effective, which schools are truly effective. My neighborhood school is Drew, and we have Miss Graves as our principal, and she is a superstar and everybody knows it. What is she doing that is so effective? Let's look at that and let's try to emulate it. We have great teachers. She's had a hand in hiring all of them, and I think that they are going to be very effective moving forward for our student population at trying to narrow some of those persistent gaps. I also think in addition to quantitative data, we should be looking at qualitative data. We're setting up the new equity office and equity teams within all of our schools. I think we need monitoring and data there as well. I used to work in public health before I went to law school, and we have these concepts called process monitoring and outcome monitoring.
You got to call your time.
All right.
Okay, thank you. But interesting perspectives, and some of them I haven't heard before. So thank you. It was very, very informative. Next, let's talk about structural racism that's been experienced by students of color in APS and the resulting achievement gaps that persist despite the fact that Arlington has a multi-million-dollar budget. We know that you've got budget deficits and tight constraints coming up. So we want to know one single priority that you're going to champion in the budget and why. Just one. We'll give you an example. You support anti-racist, unconscious bias, professional development for teachers and administrators, or maybe an evidence-based curriculum to help close knowledge gaps. So what's your one and why? And you have 2.5 minutes. And we're going with Mary first. No, wait a minute.
Are we switching?
Yes, we're switching.
Okay. So I'll go first then.
It's Miranda first. Yes, I'm sorry.
No worries. So I think that the budget priority is exactly the right way to look at it because what you're paying for is what you prioritize. And we do have funding this year for a lot of equity work at the central office level. And I think that's very important. I'm glad it's there. I am concerned that central office spending is growing at a faster clip than school spending. So I think for me, the priority would be high quality teachers. And that means, you know, the easiest, most low hanging fruit that probably any school board candidate says is let's pay our teachers well. But that's something we do need to focus on in Arlington because we're falling behind regionally. And then I think to start advancing some progress on these long-term structural issues, let's focus on hiring teachers and assistants and staff of color so that we are starting to reflect our student population, which in Arlington is incredibly diverse. And I think that it's very important to retain and recruit excellent top quality teachers, but to have those teachers reflect and resemble the student population so that we can start to advance all of the other things that are really critically important, appropriate curriculum and equity, you know, equity prioritization in our schools.
Thank you. Mayor.
Thank you. This is a tough question for me because honestly, having worked in education, the way to advance equity in our system is a complex set of levers, and we need to be pulling all of them at once. So it's really a struggle for me to identify only one.
I know it's hard, but you got to do it.
If I have to say only one, I would say that I think we are beyond due in our school division for excellent professional learning and education of our staff and our families, I would say, in understanding systemic racism, being willing to call it out, being willing to recognize implicit bias in working with students. There are many other things that are really important, but for our teachers to be able to work with research-based curriculum, for them to be able to engage their students effectively, they have to be aware of their own biases. They have to understand the way systemic racism has structured the education system and be willing to confront that, and families too. So to drive change, we have to educate this whole community of parents that there is not this thing called critical race theory that's bad, but there is this thing that exists that is a reality.
And I have to cut you, but that's a good point. Thank you very much for bringing that up. So, you know, we have so many people interested in your opinions on so many things. So I don't want to rush you, but we definitely want to touch on a few more things. Next question comes from both our education committee and our general membership. Real quick, and I'm going to cut this one. I'm going to give you 2 minutes for this one. Are you in favor of two-way busing north, south, and vice versa to achieve integration? Why or why not? You have 2 minutes. We're going with Mary first.
I'm in favor of listening to people who have been historically disadvantaged by busing and segregation and centering their opinions in what we should do in Arlington. So I would take my cues from this community and from the Latino community and others who are Black and Brown in Arlington who have been disadvantaged by attempts to desegregate and integrate our schools. I would take my cues from you. My opinion on busing is that historically busing has meant people with less privilege have been bused to communities where there is excess capacity in Arlington. That's our far north schools that are tremendously white and tremendously affluent. So what I have called for in my capacity at CCPTA as the vice president is for APS to lead a courageous conversation about desegregating our schools because it's incredibly complicated. There are a number of factors we have to consider, like whether planning units with a greater concentration of lower income students are disproportionately impacted by reassignment, whether they have public transportation to access their children's school. There's this set of factors that have to be part of the conversation about how we desegregate our schools, and it's time to have that conversation.
Thank you. Miranda.
Yeah, thank you. I have a lot of thoughts on this, and I've followed boundary processes for a couple of years, always with an eye towards how do we increase diversity, how do we move away from the historical legacy of segregation in this county, which is salient to me because my mom grew up here, and it was not that long ago when she was in high school and Hoffman Boston was the Black high school, and it closed during her time in APS. So I'm familiar with these issues. I tend to disfavor busing. I have thought a lot about it. I've seen a lot of boundary processes, including one that I advocated on back in 2018. And I tend to disfavor busing because I really have a lot of respect for and derive a lot of value from the neighborhood schools. I think they create some really great close-knit school communities that build up around kids and mold to what our students need and provide a level of service depending on the school that really fits what our student need is in those communities and allows student success. That said, I do think that it's an issue that we should all be concerned about in Arlington, the degree of segregation in our schools. I think it's not good for any of our student populations, regardless of color or income level. And so I think in the future, we should look to partner with the county and to discuss real planning. We have a dense county and we're pushing to become more dense. We need to accompany that with real infrastructure. So that we can have real meaningful alternatives to just your neighborhood school that's easy for all parents, all students to get to. And we need to advance equity in terms of access to housing and access to food and meals for students in the schools. And so I think if we focus on those things long term, then in the future, we may be able to approach boundaries in a way that doesn't feel so inadequate and doesn't rely on things like busing that have this unfortunate legacy that I think we remember from this county's history.
Thanks, Miranda. Thank you. Next question. Do you think that gentrification benefits or harms students of color, and how so? Miranda, you're first, 2.5 minutes.
Sure. Difficult, nuanced question. I live in Green Valley, and there is gentrification here, and I'm part of that. And I think it is a double-edged sword. I think that one of the things I've really focused on from a school's perspective is trying to be sensitive to the community that has existed here long before I moved here 7 or 8 years ago. And the history there and the different things that different communities value. It's not always the same thing as families who look like me, but we can come together in a way to really sort of build a school community that is open and welcoming of everybody and meets families where they are in terms of how they experience their school community and what they value. And through my work on the Drew PTA, I've really tried to do that. I think gentrification has some benefits. It can bring in more resources to a school in terms of PTA funding. It can bring in diversity, but it also can tend to create schools within, not schools within schools, but it doesn't always result in true integration. And I think that that's something that everybody who moves to a gentrifying neighborhood, myself included, really has to be sensitive to. And it's something that I think we do see play out in the schools. And again, on the Drew PTA, I've tried to take a lead in that sort of thing, at least in terms of, let's be aware of the history here, let's be sensitive, and let's move forward together in a way that brings all of the student populations together, not just the newest, the loudest, what have you.
Thank you. Mary, we'd love to hear your perspective on this.
Yeah, I'm really concerned about the impact of gentrification on communities of color and specifically our students and families of color. So my observation is that when gentrification happens, and gentrification largely bringing white and more affluent people into a school community, it fundamentally changes the character of that school community. Whether or not that's the intention of the white and affluent people that move into that community, that more than often not is the effect. And this goes back a little bit to the previous question and my comment about educating families and engaging school communities in courageous conversations about implicit bias and about systemic racism. One resource that has been really important to me in my own work to develop my understanding about race and about being an ally has been the Nice White Parents podcast that the New York Times put out last year. Some of you may have seen this. And it examines one school community as that community gentrifies and the just profound impacts on lower income families in that neighborhood and families of color by kind of this infusion of whiter and more affluent parents who had very specific ideas and priorities for their school community that didn't necessarily honor what happened. So I would say that I think the net effect is negative on those. And I would say in terms of PTA spending on the CCPTA, We are really pushing hard this year to educate our member PTAs about the disproportionate impact of PTA spending in our county. We have a PTA that spends $4,000 a year. We have PTAs that spend almost $200,000 a year. And the kinds of experiences and inequities that creates in our system is of a huge concern to me. So, you know, if there were an infusion of nice white affluent parents across the whole county who were enriching the coffers, that would be one thing, but it's not happening. It's happening in clusters and it's exacerbating inequity.
Thank you. That's good points. All right, now we've got a little bit of time left and I want to get to these questions. So I have taken the moderator liberty to cut your time in response. Next, does the Arlington Endorsement Caucus disenfranchise voters and compromise the inclusion of a diverse slate of candidates? If so, if you agree with that, what needs to be done to create a fair and inclusive election process? And you have 1.5 minutes. Oh, I'm sorry. And Miranda, I think it's your turn to go first.
Oh,
no, I'm sorry. It's Mary's turn to go first. I'm wrong.
I have much to say on this topic, and I have 90 seconds to say it. So let me say, first of all, the school board race in Virginia is meant to be a nonpartisan race. And with all due respect to the Arlington Democrats, I would like to see the Arlington Democrats be able to endorse a candidate in the normal way that other community organizations do without running a caucus that artificially can constrain the participation of some people. What we're seeing this year in the online caucus is particularly concerning to me, where we have practices that encourage candidates to go out and collect votes from voters, which I think is a recipe for coercion and a slippery slope. And we have an online system that doesn't really validate that, in fact, the purpose of this is a Democratic caucus. We have people posting today on social media encouraging Republicans to come and vote in the Democratic caucus. So there are all kinds of issues related to this where I feel like it is not serving the purpose that it was originally intended to serve.
So
and
what would you do?
I would encourage the Arlington Democrats to give up the caucus practice and to move to a different kind of endorsement process if they still want to have a hand in influencing the vote in November.
Thank you for being direct. Appreciate that. Miranda, your 90 seconds begins now.
All right, I'll do my best. I mean, I agree with some of the concerns around the caucus. It's a less well-known process. People are very confused when I speak with them about why it's happening now and not in June. It's not on the normal cycle, and that alone depresses turnout. It is also a nonpartisan seat. And so to have a partisan endorsement process, I think it does tend to discourage folks from voting who would otherwise be very interested in voting for a school board candidate. You know, there are other issues with the school board process that the Dems have set up. The turn to online voting was partially COVID, and it leads to some opportunities, I think, to go out into the community and increase turnout. But the in-person options for voting are weird this year. They're off-putting. They're in people's driveways or at Cafe Saison, and so that's another way it depresses turnout. So I tend to agree with in the future not doing this off-cycle very early endorsement process for the school board race. It is in fact a nonpartisan race, and I do think that it might be better for the school system as a whole to treat it as such. Certainly as a candidate, I would love to have a shorter time to campaign as opposed to having to do it from March to November if I'm lucky enough to win the endorsement. So I would look at an alternative process in the future.
Thank you very much. All right. Very limited amount of time left, so I want really short answers to this. For this one, from the Environmental Justice Committee, what plans do you have to consider clean energy for the bus fleet? And I'm gonna say, let's do 45 seconds for this one, ladies.
Okay, I think it's my turn.
Miranda, you first.
Yes, ma'am, I'll try. I think that that's an important thing to look at. I also think it's important to do what we can to minimize our use of buses generally. It's expensive, And it's not good for the environment, and it's not great for our kids, especially after this year. There's been a lot more staying at home, a lot less real PE as opposed to virtual PE. So I think we should do what we can to encourage walking, to make it safe, to do things like bicycle trains and walk trains to school, and to really get the community out to both keep kids safe from traffic, slow down the cars, and move forward in that way. But yes, if we have to rely on buses, I absolutely think we should be looking at that from an environmental perspective as well.
Thank you. Perfect. Mary, next to the last answer for you. Clean energy for the bus fleet.
Arlington County has a community energy plan. The schools need a commensurate effort with commitment to get to net zero emissions by the target date that's set in the CEP. The ingredients for that are replacing fossil fuel powered vehicles in the school bus fleet with alternative energy vehicles on a regular schedule, and also looking at ways that we can institute clean renewable energy in our schools. So things like the recent solar installations that happened at 2 of our schools earlier this spring. We need to amplify those efforts and get our buildings on clean energy, both retrofits and new construction. And we need to be tracking and reporting to the community the progress that we're making as a school system in converting to clean energy.
Thank you very much. And we have 1 minute left. We actually have one question. One of you already answered it in a commenting on something. And I know that Sharice posted the link to the April 25th session that you all did with the education group, where I know this issue was discussed in much more detail. But just to close, are you, just for the record, are you in favor of SROs? And just 30 seconds, how will you talk to your colleagues who support SROs if you are not in support of them? Mary, Mary, you're first.
SROs need to come out of schools, period. There is a process that the APS has undertaken that should have been lumped in with the police practices working group. It should have been one process holistically, like DC and other places have done. There is clear data that demonstrates that SROs are not effective in their intended purpose and harm students of color and students with disabilities. It is a moral imperative that we do something about this. And as a school board member, it would be my job to engage with members of the community that didn't understand that or objected to that, and to lobby hard with my colleagues to take decisive action.
Thank you. And Miranda, you can close us out with your comment. Thank you.
I'll keep it quick. I know you've seen my prior response. I am a lawyer. I view this through the prism of rights. And to me, when a police officer is present, your rights are different. And it's not appropriate for school. It's not appropriate for our younger students in particular. And as you get older in the schools, if there is a conversation to be had about whether policing is needed in the schools, let's have it. But to me, they do not belong in the schools. And I will address your second sub question, which is how do you go about persuading people? And I think that's it. You have to have a conversation and you say, I understand your concerns. There was the recent incident at Wakefield that was reported as coordinated by SROs in terms of the response for safety purposes. Let's talk about that. But then let's talk about the flip side, where so many of our students are seeing disparate impacts, disproportionate disciplinary practices, and respond to a badge differently. And we have to have that conversation and try to get community buy-in in order to get the SROs out of our schools.
Thank you very much. Thank both of you. Your responses were greatly appreciated. And thank you to the NAACP for giving me this opportunity. I hope you all thought I did a good job. I did my best, and just thanks again for asking me.
Thank you all.
Well, yeah, so everyone who's on the call, let's give Wilma Jones. Wilma, put your video back on. Let's give her a virtual hand clap, everyone.
Good job, Wilma.
Yeah, good job. Thank you, Wilma. And thank you to all the participants in tonight's structured dialogue hosted by the NAACP. We need to give another shout out to our amazing political action team, Ms. Megan Resnor and Jamie Abrams. Let's give them a hand clap, y'all, please. Thank you. And to all of our committees, education, criminal justice, environmental, climate justice, economic development, labor and industry, and to all the members who submitted questions, thank you for doing a good job. Wilma, you're awesome. I love you to death. So this was great. We're hopeful that later on tonight we will get this posted on our website in a YouTube form and share it. That way, those that did not attend tonight will be able to view it. And again, it's been wonderful sitting here hearing the dialogue from the candidates, and they're not these canned answers, right? So I thought it came from the heart. They try to be genuine, and that's what we want here at the NAACP. My duty is short. My time, I am going to stick around for a few minutes as put up there on the schedule, but this, my friends, concludes our meeting. Thank you for attending tonight. We're going to stop recording. Thank you for attending. The meeting is now adjourned.